You wake before dawn because someone is screaming. Not the kind of scream that fades after a moment, not drunken shouting from the street below, not a child crying in the dark. This is the sound of a city realizing it has been sealed shut. You sit upright on the straw mattress, cold air pressing through the cracks in the shutters. For a moment, you don't understand what you're hearing. Then the church bell begins to ring. Once, twice, then over and over, faster now, harder, a frantic iron warning carried across the rooftops. Outside, feet pound over stone, doors slam, voices rise. Somewhere in the distance, a horse shrieks. You go to the window and push the shutter open just enough to look down into the lane. People are already running uphill toward the inner square. A baker in his apron, a woman clutching 2 children by the wrists, a priest lifting his robe so he can move faster. Everyone looking in the same direction, toward the walls. And beyond them, over the morning mist, you see it. Hundreds of tents, banners, smoke. A ring of steel and canvas spreading around your town like a tightening fist. The enemy arrived in the night. No one is leaving now. No grain carts, no shepherds, no merchants from the river road, no riders carrying news to the next city. No help, only the walls. Only whatever food is already here. Only however long the wells hold. And the part that truly settles into your chest like a stone is this. A siege does not kill you all at once. It kills you slowly. First by fear, then by hunger, then by the things hunger turns people into. Today, I want to take you inside one of the most terrifying experiences in medieval life. Being trapped inside a city under siege. Not the heroic version from paintings, not the clean version told in school. The real experience of waiting, starving, praying, watching the walls, and wondering which will come first. Rescue, surrender, or the moment your neighbors stop acting like neighbors. Because for most people in the Middle Ages, war was not glorious cavalry charges and shining armor. It was being trapped behind stone while the world outside turned hostile. And once the gates closed, everything changed. The first hours are confusion. That's what people forget. A siege doesn't begin with perfect order. It begins with rumor, contradiction, men shouting over one another. Someone says the enemy is only a raiding party. Someone else says there are thousands. Someone swears the Lord's army is only a day away. Another says the roads are already cut and the bridges burned. At the gate, carts jam together in panic. Peasants from nearby villages are still trying to get in. Some make it. Some don't. The guards have to decide in minutes who is worth admitting, and who must be left outside before the doors are barred. That decision alone can haunt a city. Because if too many mouths come in, the food runs out faster. If too few are let in, the enemy gets free labor, free information, and living witnesses to your refusal. You stand in the market square with everyone else, waiting for news from the walls. The town officials climb the steps of the guild hall and start shouting instructions. Water must be drawn and stored. Grain inventories must be counted. Every household must report how much food it holds. Smiths are ordered to work without pause. Carpenters are told to reinforce doors, ladders, and fighting platforms. Priests begin leading public prayers before breakfast is even done. And then comes the sound that makes the danger real. The gates closing. If you have never heard a city gate shut in fear, imagine the heaviest door you know, made larger, thicker, final. Wood, iron, chain, and beam grinding together until the whole street seems to feel it. That sound tells everyone the same thing. From this moment on, the city is an island. Inside the walls, life tightens immediately. The rich send servants to buy up salted meat, dried beans, lamp oil, anything that keeps. Bakers are mobbed. Alehouses empty their barrels. Housewives begin hiding food in floorboards, in chests, inside sacks of wool. Men who yesterday joked in the square are now counting candles. And above it all, there is the wall itself. Because in a siege, the wall becomes the edge of your world. Every eye goes there. Every rumor begins there. Every hope rises or dies there. Children are dragged indoors. Old men climb towers to look. Apprentices carry stones to the battlements. Women stitch bandages and boil water. The lord or commander rides along the defenses trying to appear calm enough for everyone else to borrow his courage. Sometimes he has courage. Sometimes he is just acting because if the city sees fear on his face, everything may collapse before the enemy even attacks. That first day, people still believe the siege may be brief. Maybe the attackers only want payment. Maybe they will test the walls and leave. Maybe they are waiting for terms. Maybe a banner of truce will appear by noon. But then the enemy begins to settle in. They raise pavilions, dig ditches, position archers, mark roads, build cook fires, drive off livestock from the fields. They are not here for a raid. They are here to stay. And by sunset, everyone inside the city understands the same terrible arithmetic. There are more of them than there are of you. They chose the time. They chose the ground. And every day they wait makes you weaker. Most people imagine a siege as constant battle. It usually wasn't. A medieval siege was often a contest of endurance. The attackers did not always need to storm the walls. In fact, storming walls was dangerous, expensive, and unpredictable. Scaling ladders under arrows and stones could turn victory into slaughter in minutes. A smart commander often preferred patience. Why lose men in an assault if hunger can do the work for you? That is the true terror of siege warfare. The enemy can simply sit outside and let time become a weapon. Inside the walls, every loaf eaten is one less loaf remaining. Every horse fed is fodder that cannot feed a cow. Every candle burned means one less night of light. Every injury drains cloth, wine, herbs, attention. The city begins taking stock of itself the way a drowning man counts breaths. How many sacks of grain? How much salted fish? How many working wells? How much firewood? How many animals can be slaughtered before breeding stock is destroyed? How many men can still stand watch after 3 nights with no proper sleep? You begin to realize that survival depends not only on bravery, but on inventory. And inventory is merciless. The garrison may be strong, the walls may be thick, the church may still be standing. None of that changes the numbers in the granary. Some medieval sieges ended quickly, with negotiation or assault. Others dragged on for months. A few went on so long that the people inside stopped measuring time by saints' days and started measuring it by what was left to eat. First the fresh bread disappears, then the white flour, then the better grain, then anything that can be boiled. The city may try rationing early. Sometimes it works. Often it doesn't. Because rationing requires trust. And siege conditions are acid poured over trust. If people think officials are hiding food, anger grows. If nobles eat meat while commoners get husks, anger grows. If monasteries are rumored to have private stores, anger grows. If merchants are caught hoarding, anger grows. A city under siege does not simply fight the enemy outside. It fights suspicion inside, and suspicion can break a wall faster than a trebuchet. Sooner or later you go up to the battlements, maybe because you are assigned there, maybe because your husband, brother, or son is on watch, maybe because not knowing is worse than seeing. From the wall, the siege looks even more complete. You can see how carefully the enemy has arranged itself. Tents grouped by unit, supply wagons in guarded circles, horses picketed beyond bowshot, siege engines under construction, trees in the nearby copse already coming down under axes. That sound becomes part of your life. Cutting wood. The enemy is building something, and you know it is meant for you. A ram, a tower, mantlets, catapults, ladders. Every hammer blow from outside the wall feels like a promise of pain, arriving later. And then there are the small things you notice, because fear sharpens detail. A soldier outside kneeling to sharpen a blade on a stone, a line of camp followers carrying water, a priest among the enemy lifting a cross or relic before their men, the banners moving in the wind, bright and confident, as if the people beneath them already know the city will fall. That may be the worst part of looking down. To them, your terror is logistics. Your home is an objective. Your church is a position. Your children are mouths inside a problem. From the wall, you also begin to understand how exposed defenders are. Movies often make battlements look safe. They were not. Archers and crossbowmen watch every slit, every tower top, every silhouette against the sky. If you show too much of yourself over the parapet, a bolt can find your throat before you even hear it fired. So the men on watch learn a new posture, crouched, peering, flinching at every whistle in the air. They sleep in fragments, eat standing up, piss in corners, scratch at flea bites under armor gone sour with sweat. And all the while they wait for the next test. Sometimes the enemy sends a herald demanding surrender. Open the gates and live. Refuse, and no mercy will be shown. This is not always a bluff. In medieval warfare, mercy was uncertain and selective. A city that surrendered early might negotiate terms. A city that resisted too long, especially if it forced a costly assault, could face looting, massacre, ransom, rape, enslavement, or execution once the walls were breached. Everyone inside knows this, which means every time surrender is discussed, the real argument is not abstract honor. It is this: do we trust them if we yield? And if we resist, what happens when they come over the wall? A siege is waiting, punctuated by terror. The first attack often comes suddenly, not because it will succeed, but because it is meant to test you. At dawn, horns, shouting, men running to stations, arrows rising in a dark curve over the enemy line. The city erupts. Bells ring. Dogs bark. Women drag buckets toward the walls in case of fire. Boys carry stones. Priests shout prayers almost as loudly as officers shout orders. If the attackers come with ladders, the defenders meet them with everything they have: arrows, crossbow bolts, rocks, poles to shove ladders back, boiling water if nothing else is available, sometimes hot sand, which slips under armor and keeps burning. You learn quickly that medieval warfare was intimate in all the worst ways. A man climbing your wall is not an abstract enemy. He is a face under a helmet, teeth bared, boots scraping stone as you try to push him backward before he reaches level ground and kills the person beside you. Sometimes the attackers get close enough for you to hear them breathing. Sometimes they scream in your language. Sometimes in a foreign tongue. Sometimes in the universal language of pain. And when a ladder tips, the men on it do not fall cleanly. They strike stone, wood, one another. Bones crack, helmets split. Those below are crushed under those above. For a moment the defenders cheer. Then another ladder rises. Then another. Hours can pass like this, not in smooth, dramatic flow, but in jolts of panic and bursts of exhaustion. Attack, pull back, wait, watch, attack again. If the enemy has siege engines, the city begins to live under impact. A stone from a trebuchet is not just destructive, it is theatrical. You hear the sling release, then the impossible pause, then the strike. A roof opens, a tower face cracks. A courtyard erupts in splinters and dust. If the attackers use incendiaries, now you have fire as well as fear. People rush with wet cloth and ladders. Roof, timbers, smoke. Ash falls into food stores. A single flaming hit can do what 100 arrows cannot. At night the city doesn't rest. It listens for digging beneath the walls, for wheels moving in the dark, for men trying to approach with hooks and ladders, for that sudden impossible crash that means a section has failed. You sleep dressed, if you sleep at all, and every morning you count what is still standing. If the walls hold, hunger takes over. Not dramatic hunger at first, not famine, just absence. Less bread, thinner stew, one meal instead of two. People tell themselves they can manage, and they can. For a while, the early stage of hunger is almost disciplined. Rations are announced, markets are controlled. The authorities inspect stores and threaten punishment for hoarding. The church urges charity. The wealthy make public donations, sometimes sincerely, sometimes to calm the crowd. Then prices begin to climb anyway. A loaf costs twice what it did before the siege, then 4 times. Then it disappears completely except through favors, theft, or violence. Soon the diet changes from what people prefer to what remains. Coarse grain, peas, beans with weevils, old cheese, salted scraps, anything dried, anything that can be stretched with water. The lucky still eat. The unlucky begin to barter. A cloak for flour, a ring for onions, a silver clasp for a jug of oil, a family heirloom for 1 sack of meal that may be half sawdust. Then the animals start disappearing. First poultry, then pigs, then dogs, then horses if the situation is truly grim. In some sieges, records describe people boiling leather, chewing belts, scraping grease from tools, grinding bark into meal. The exact details varied, but the pattern was always the same. The city descended the ladder of what counts as food, and hunger does not just empty the belly, it changes the mind. People become sharper, meaner, more suspicious. Small disputes turn ugly. A missing loaf becomes a public accusation. A child seen carrying meat can start a fight in the street. Those who still look well-fed are hated on sight. You start noticing smells too, not good smells, the lack of them. No fresh bread from ovens at dawn, no onions frying in fat, no broth rich enough to carry through an alley. Instead, smoke, refuse, sickness, unwashed bodies, and the sour animal smell of too many frightened people enclosed together. This is where a siege becomes something deeper than military encirclement. It becomes the slow dismantling of ordinary life. Once food weakens people, disease comes easily. Crowding helps it. Stress helps it. Contaminated water helps it. Dead animals not buried properly help it. So do corpses when the shelling or assaults become frequent enough. Medieval cities were not sanitary in the best of times. Under siege, they become breeding grounds. Latrines overflow. Refuse piles higher. Water grows suspect. Flies multiply. Wounds fester because bandages are reused and clean linen is scarce. A small cut from a splinter can become a fever. A cough can move through a household in days. Children weaken first. The old go silent. And doctors, where they exist, can do little. Herbs run out. Vinegar is diluted. Prayer increases in direct proportion to medical failure. Soon the bells that once warned of attack begin tolling for the dead. At first, each funeral is still marked. Then several at once. Then hasty burials. Then graves outside the churchyard if space is gone. This is one of the cruelest features of siege. Even if the enemy never enters, people die all the same. Not because a sword struck them, because the city closed around them and started to rot from within. Sometimes defenders try to hide the scale of disease so morale won't collapse. But disease is hard to conceal. People hear coughing through walls. They see carts carrying bodies. They notice doors marked or streets avoided. And once the city begins to suspect that death is moving house to house, panic changes shape. Now it is not only the enemy beyond the walls you fear, it is your neighbor's breath. By now, days no longer feel normal. Time becomes warped. Morning, check the walls. Midday, search for food. Afternoon, listen for engines or orders. Evening, count who has not returned. Night, lie awake at every sound. There is no future, only continuation. This is one of the least discussed parts of siege warfare, the psychological compression. You live inside a permanent emergency. There is never relief, only intervals between sharper forms of dread. Children become quiet or strangely wild. Adults snap over nothing. Priests preach harder. Rumors spread faster than truth. A messenger bird seen overhead becomes a sign of rescue. A fire in the enemy camp becomes proof they are withdrawing. A gap in the attack line becomes evidence of plague among them. People cling to any story that points toward ending, and because they need hope, they become vulnerable to lies. Sometimes city officials exploit this. They overstate the strength of relief forces. They claim reinforcements are one day away when none are coming. They read letters publicly, real or forged, to maintain order. In some cases, this buys time. In others, it simply postpones the explosion. Because if hope collapses too suddenly, the crowd becomes dangerous. Under siege, there are always several populations inside one wall. Those who want to resist at any cost. Those who want immediate surrender. Those who profit from scarcity, those too hungry to care, and those waiting for an opportunity to betray the rest. That last group matters more than people think. A city can survive bombardment. It can survive hunger for a while. What it often cannot survive is a gate opened from the inside, so suspicion hardens. Who spoke with the enemy herald too long? Why was that baker seen near the postern door? Why does that merchant still have flour? Why did the guard on the north wall leave his station? In extreme cases, neighbors denounce neighbors. Torture is used to expose supposed traitors. Men are arrested for speaking too openly of surrender. Foreigners are watched. Jews, migrants, or unpopular minorities may become scapegoats if fear turns ugly enough. A siege magnifies every fracture already present in a city, and by this point, even if no stone has broken the wall, the city itself is beginning to crack. The siege is cruel to everyone, but not in the same way. If you are an able-bodied man, especially one assigned to the walls, your terror is direct. Arrows, blades, collapse, exhaustion. If you are a woman, your burden may be broader and more constant. You carry water, cook what little remains, care for children, the sick, the elderly, tear old garments into strips for bandages, queue for food, search for fuel, manage fear in smaller faces while hiding your own. And if the city falls, you know exactly what may follow. In medieval warfare, women in a captured town were often among the most vulnerable. Outcomes varied depending on commander, custom, religion, discipline, ransom value, and the terms of surrender. But everyone inside knew the possibilities. Assault, forced marriage, enslavement, abduction, extortion. Fear of capture shaped decisions long before the wall was ever breached. That is why women under siege often face two horrors at once: the present misery of starvation and the future terror of what surrender might mean. Children suffer differently. At first they ask questions. Then they ask for food. Then they stop asking. They grow weak, their bellies swell or flatten, their games disappear. Their crying becomes intermittent because crying takes energy. For parents, that may be the worst pain of all. Not your own hunger, but the sight of a child trying to sleep through it. The old often become resigned sooner. Some have seen raids before. Some remember previous famines. Some give their portions away. Others simply fade. Their bodies cannot negotiate with scarcity for long. In every siege, some groups are spoken for in grand speeches about honor and resistance, and then quietly sacrificed by the reality of endurance. At some point, the city begins to say the word out loud: surrender. At first only in private, then in whispers after sermons, then in angry arguments in courtyards, then openly in council. This is one of the most dangerous moments in any siege, because the city now faces a choice that can destroy it either way. Resist, and people may starve, sicken, and die on the walls only for the city to fall anyway. Surrender, and you must trust the mercy of men who have spent weeks or months reducing your home to misery. Not every besieging army was equally brutal. Some accepted terms, some allowed ransoms, some spared non-combatants. But no one inside the walls could know with certainty whether promises would hold once the gates opened. And commanders knew this. That is why a siege often included displays meant to break morale. Prisoners paraded before the walls, severed heads, burned suburbs, captured scouts, hanged within sight of the towers. Sometimes the enemy offered generous terms early and harsher ones later. They understood the same principle as hunger. Time weakens the trapped. Inside the city council chamber, arguments grow vicious. The nobles speak of honor. Merchants speak of goods and losses. Clergy speak of God's will. Soldiers speak of the wall's condition. Mothers speak of children. All of them are right. None of them can solve the central fact that the city is running out of time. And if relief does not arrive soon, someone will decide for everyone. Perhaps a council vote, perhaps a mutiny, perhaps a mob, perhaps a traitor in the dark. Not every siege ends in one dramatic storm. Sometimes the end is negotiated. Sometimes it is discovered at dawn that the defenders slipped away in the night. Sometimes disease in the enemy camp lifts the siege unexpectedly. But when a city does fall by force, the transition is horrifyingly fast. For weeks or months, life narrows to waiting. Then suddenly everything happens at once. A section of wall gives way. A gate catches fire. A postern is opened from within. A tower is overwhelmed. Bells ring not as warning now, but as alarm layered on panic. Men run toward breaches they know may already be lost. Civilians flee inward, though there is often nowhere truly safe to flee. Smoke thickens. Orders become impossible to hear. Horses crash through streets too narrow for order. Priests carry relics. Mothers drag children. Looters inside the city begin before the enemy fully enters, because collapse has its own opportunists, and then the attackers are through. Once armed men pour into a medieval city that has been taken by assault, control becomes fragile. Even disciplined armies can fracture into looting units. Men who have suffered casualties through a long siege often feel entitled to plunder as payment. Houses are smashed open, churches are not always spared, storehouses are stripped. Anyone rich enough to ransom may be dragged out alive. Anyone poor, unlucky, or trapped may face whatever violence the moment permits. This is why defenders feared assault more than battle in the field. A lost battle kills soldiers. A stormed city consumes everyone. The lucky find a hiding place, a cellar, a crypt, a priest willing to intercede, a commander willing to enforce terms, a relative with enough money to ransom them. an enemy soldier with enough restraint to pass them by. The unlucky become part of the aftermath. And afterward, when the noise finally settles, the city is no longer the same place. Because even if the walls still stand, siege has altered what lived behind them. But let's step back for a moment, because sometimes the city did not fall. Sometimes the defenders endured long enough. A relief army appeared over the ridge. The besiegers ran out of money or food. Disease swept the camp outside instead of the town inside. Winter came, politics shifted. A rival front opened elsewhere. The besieging lord died. The campaign simply became too expensive to continue. And one morning, the people on the walls saw something they had stopped allowing themselves to imagine: the enemy taking down its tents. At first, no one believes it. Then the lines thin. Then the wagons move. Then the banners begin to retreat. No charge, no miracle at the gate. Just absence, slowly widening. If you survive long enough to see that, the emotion is not always triumph. Sometimes it is disbelief, sometimes numbness, sometimes tears so delayed they feel borrowed. The gates do not open immediately. People still fear a trick. Scouts go out cautiously. Then finally, after all those days or weeks or months, the city breathes outward again. And the first thing many survivors notice is the smell. Open ground, wet earth, grass, the outside world returning. But survival does not mean restoration. The dead remain dead. The food stores are still empty. Disease may still linger. Fields have been burned. Trade has been interrupted. Families have been broken by hunger, grief, or betrayal. A city that survives a siege often carries it for years afterward, in debt, orphanhood, ruined buildings, and memory. And memory may be the deepest scar, because those who lived through siege do not simply remember danger. They remember what people became under pressure. Who shared bread? Who hid it? Who stood the wall? Who opened the gate? Who profited? Who prayed? Who despaired? Who endured longer than anyone thought possible? So what was it actually like to be trapped inside a medieval siege? It was not one emotion. It was layers. Fear when the bells first rang, urgency when the gates shut, defiance on the walls, then hunger, then fatigue, then suspicion, then the strange flattening of the spirit that comes when every day asks the same terrible question: can we survive one more? It was hearing your city reduced to inventory, seeing wealth become edible only when exchanged, watching authority become fragile, learning that walls protect you physically while imprisoning you psychologically. It was finding out whether faith deepened under pressure or simply became the last language people had left. It was discovering that courage exists, but so do panic, selfishness, hoarding, betrayal, and the brutal arithmetic of survival. And perhaps most of all, it was realizing that in siege warfare the enemy did not always need to kill you directly. They could wait while hunger did it, while disease did it, while fear hollowed you from the inside. That is why the medieval siege terrified people so deeply. Not because death was certain, but because death came slowly enough to watch society unravel before it reached you. When we imagine the Middle Ages, we often picture stone castles, banners in the wind, armored knights, heroic last stands. But for ordinary people, a siege was less like legend and more like confinement under pressure. No escape, no certainty, no guarantee of mercy. Only walls, ration lines, rumors, and the long shrinking distance between what a person needs to live and what a city can still provide. That is the part history paintings rarely show. Not the charge, the waiting. Not the banner on the tower, the mother dividing one crust 3 ways, the guard trying to stay awake at midnight in freezing rain, the child asking when the market will open again, the council arguing over surrender while the wells grow lower, the whole city listening for the next impact in the dark. A medieval siege was not just a military event. It was a machine for grinding down the human body and the human mind at the same time. And if you were trapped inside one, survival depended on more than walls. It depended on food, discipline, luck, leadership, weather, disease, and whether the people around you remained a community longer than fear could break them apart.